Thank you so much for joining today's advocacy workshop. For those of you who have not had the pleasure yet of meeting, my name is Shayna Baser, and I'm the Managing Director of Advocacy and Policy Strategy at UNA-NCA. And today we have the pleasure of co-hosting this workshop with our friends from Lutheran Social Services. I want to hand things over to Dana to introduce herself. Dana, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shayna, and thank you, UNA-NCA. We're very excited for this opportunity. I'm the Director of Community Outreach for the Lutheran Social Services. We are one of the major refugee resettlement organizations in this region. So we do refugee resettlement in Maryland, as well as in Northern Virginia. And we've been doing these services since just after World War II. So we've been in the resettlement game for quite a long time. Just to give a little more information about LSS, we are an affiliate of the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, who are one of the 9 national agencies for refugee resettlement. And we have programs that are outside of resettlement. We do foster care licensing for unaccompanied refugee minors. So anyone over the age of 21 looking to be a foster parent for refugee youth can do that through us. We have adoption services. We do relationships education for youth in DC and Maryland, have retreats for domestic youth that are impacted by HIV, and we provide mental health and trafficking screenings to asylum seekers. We've been doing various services in the DMV region for over 100 years now, and that, of course, is how our programs have culminated to this day. And refugee-wise, we resettled about 500 people over the last fiscal year, and 94% of those clients have been Afghan nationals who come through the special immigrant visa program. I know everyone recently saw the news about pulling out of Afghanistan and an official policy around that. I am joined today by John Murphy, who is my advocacy associate, and he has really been instrumental in leading our path for local advocacy and advocacy at the national level, since we're poised in a very important region in the United States. So thank you to John, and thank you, Shayna and UNA and Olivia.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you, LSS. Today, in accompaniment to our workshop, we're also very proud to share our new Advocacy Action Guide, which Olivia will be dropping a link to in the chat so that you can take a look at it after. Now, the purpose of today, and I'm going to go ahead, and if you haven't filled out the poll already on your screen, please do so, because we want to get a sense of where your comfort and confidence level pertaining to advocacy rests right now. My goal for today is for us to leave this session with a feeling of excitement to go and to advocate, even in this virtual space, to feel confident in the tools that you're equipped with, and most of all, to feel prepared. Now, we're going to do this by giving a general overview of meeting structure. So about 25% of the folks in this call right now are first-time advocates. So you're going to get a sense of what actually happens in a congressional meeting. What do you talk about? How do you facilitate it? Because there's a lot of uncertainty when you've never participated or when you've done it in person but not in a virtual environment. We're also going to give a policy overview of the 2021 U.S. Citizenship Act, because in addition to some open discussion and hearing from our experienced advocates about their favorite tips, tricks, practices for effective advocacy, we're then going to put these skills into practice. We're going to facilitate some breakout groups and simulate what a congressional meeting actually looks like using the Citizenship Act as our policy example for today. So like I said, about 25% of the folks here have not participated in a congressional meeting before. And I'd say it's pretty split in terms of confidence. So hopefully we're going to see those numbers change in your confidence level as we move forward. Starting with expectations, one of the main questions that I hear is, how do we prepare? How do you get ready for a congressional meeting? I always recommend reviewing the talking points that either UNA or LSS has crafted, or whatever organization you're advocating with, because a lot of times they won't just have important facts, but also some of those rhetorical framing devices. How do you sort of navigate when you're talking about something maybe that's a little contentious, like climate change, which unfortunately is still contentious for some representatives? How do you frame it in a way so that you can talk about your policy goal, but through this avenue of shared goals and accessible language? You're also going to want to connect with your delegation in advance so that you have time to consider who's doing the introduction, who's delivering the core ask. I also recommend researching the representative you're talking to. What committees do they sit on? What's their voting record like? And how can you then connect their interests to your interests and the issue you're there to talk about? In terms of what the meeting structure is going to look like, there's going to be introduction, some context as to why you're there. You're going to deliver your core ask. So for example, today we're going to practice delivering the core ask of seeking co-sponsorships for the 2021 US Citizenship Act. You'll have an opportunity to answer questions from the representative or their congressional staffer, and you're going to want to make a plan for follow-up, leaving behind materials and resources for the office, following up via email or a phone call. It really depends, but you want to make sure that you don't leave a meeting without that plan. In terms of what you'll actually talk about in a meeting, these are some of the key areas that we've identified so that you can walk that fine line between getting your information across, but not necessarily slipping into just presenting and just sort of inundating the person you're talking to with a bunch of information. You also want to remember that it's a conversation. It's going to be a little tricky in a virtual environment, especially when you're going around the room. But if you connect with your delegation, if you try and keep to these issue areas, it's a lot more feasible to strike that balance. So you'll want to introduce the organization you're representing, the why you're there. When possible, connecting the facts of the topic to a personal story is a way to make it sort of grounded in reality, especially when you're a constituent, because your representative cares about your interests as a constituent. There's also an opportunity to talk briefly about other issues. For example, if you're advocating with UNA, NCA, you can connect it to broader UN issues as sort of that framework for, again, the broader context of your work. What you want to make sure is very, very clear is the delivery of your core ask. Sometimes we recommend that you have one person and their sole job is to deliver that core ask so that it doesn't get lost in the flow of conversations, that you're bringing it back around by saying, and we would like you to support statehood for DC, and we would like you to support the resolution on the SDGs. And then you prepare to answer questions. I'd love to throw things over to Selena, who is an intern on, she's a program assistant for our Global Classrooms DC program. Selena is a fantastic advocate who has joined us in recent meetings. And Selena, if you want to go ahead and unmute, one thing that I found was really powerful was in our recent meetings about statehood, you talked about your perspective as a Virginian and sort of wove that into your argument for DC statehood. So I thought it'd be a great example to hear from you today, sort of how you framed that.
Thank you, Shayna. I appreciate the call out. This is an honor to be here and to be representative for this, but really where I gained my foothold in the advocacy realm is taking advantage of these trainings. I have found that I have attended a previous advocacy training and it was very helpful. And so that's really where I got just my ideas for what I was going to say. And then for those specific meetings with Senators Tim Kaine and Senator Mark Warner, who are my Virginia senators, I basically did research, like Shayna said, into what their stance was on DC statehood. And then I also just tried to make that personal connection by bringing in personal stories, especially surrounding the Capitol insurrection that happened, and just tying the fact that, you know, I live close to the Capitol, the fear that I felt that day, and the desire for DC while I'm watching these events unfold on television, the desire for DC to be able to maintain control of their own National Guard, which is a key part of granting DC statehood. So I basically focused on one specific element of DC statehood and tied it to a personal connection. That did require a bit of digging of my own just to understand how the National Guard works in DC, but it's a quick Google search. I did it quickly using the guidance provided by the advocacy team. I was able to easily weave that in. So yeah, I think what Shayna has been saying, I just want to reiterate, follow the process. It works. It provides you with some sort of foothold to then get a little creative with the research that you find and then use that to expand and just deliver a solid advocacy meeting.
Thanks, Selena. I think it's such a great example because sometimes it's tough. If you're not a DC resident, how do you advocate for DC statehood? If you're not a refugee, how can you effectively advocate for refugee rights? And so I think, Selena, your perspective as a Virginian, tying it to a very emotional and important moment in history, something that would have a lot of impact and emotional resonance to the staffer that you were speaking with, and using that to then deliver the ask was just a really fantastic example. So an opportunity to give kudos to Selena, but also a really important example for us as we continue to refine our skills as advocates. So now we're going to move into our policy briefing. We will be sharing the talking points, essentially a summary of what Dana is going to share, so that you can reference it during the later part of our workshop. And we'll be answering any questions that you might have. So at this point, Dana, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. And as we go into refugee and migrant policy actual issues, I want to reiterate a tip for meeting with your members of Congress and with their teammates is both to not assume they know about the topic, but don't assume that they don't know about the topic. You never know what the person you meet with from the office, you might not know what their position directly is doing research on and preparing briefings for. So they may be really familiar with the topic of refugee and migrant rights. They might not. So it's very helpful in the beginning, after you've done those introductions, to ask, what is your knowledge on refugee issues and refugee and migrant issues locally, to really bring it to their constituency, and to not assume that they don't already have this knowledge and understanding. So first, I want to go over some basic terms. So refugee, a person with refugee status themselves, is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country because of fear of persecution for race, nationality, membership in a particular group, or political opinion. These, or ethnic group association. So this definition is legal. It's an international legal definition that's given by the UN. It's given to individuals that are outside of their current country. So if someone meets this definition, but they're in their country, they're an internally displaced person. An immigrant or migrant is simply someone who leaves their country and enters another where they may legally resettle and work without restriction. And then finally, asylum seeker is an immigrant that comes to a second or third country and seeks protection. So they seek the same protections that someone who already has refugee status legally has. And then it's that country, like the United States, that is supposed to do a legal immigration process to assert whether or not their claim for asylum is valid and they should be protected and given status within that country they are seeking it at. I do want to note that of the 500 clients that LSS saw in the last year in the DMV region, I said 94% of those clients are Afghan nationals, and those individuals come as special immigrant visa holders. So you may hear SIV, especially in the news, around policy for the exit from Afghanistan. These individuals are are given status and a visa for their immediate family to come to the US because they have worked for our military or our US mission in Afghanistan. So they have been interpreters, security guards, they have been accountants, all sorts of ways they could have given service for 2 years. And then they file for a visa, which they have to be sponsored by their supervisor within the military or US government. And they have to have a claim of seeking protection against the Taliban. And this is basically a trade for the service that they have given to the US. So those individuals are coming into our country with visas that are valid for their families, but they are resettled under the same programming that State Department provides for refugees for resettlement in the US. So it's a different process, but it's basically treating these individuals as if they are refugees. They just haven't left their country of origin yet. Great, so next are some facts and figures from the UNHCR, which is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. It is believed that there are just about 80 million displaced people in the world. So this is displaced of any sort. 26 million of those are refugees. So they're already outside of their country. About half of those individuals are children, and a large percentage are women as well. Additionally, of those who will be resettled in a third country like the United States, that percentage is less than 0.5%. This is a huge amount of people that are waiting in camps and waiting for asylum, and yet the United States only accepts so many people, and even when our numbers were highest, there's only about 30 countries that are allowing for resettlement of refugees. So it is such a small dent in that. An additional 42 million are asylum seekers, and additional to that, you have internally displaced people, whether they've been uprooted because of war, because of climate change, making their living situation inhospitable, and they are basically trapped within their own country, but they have the UN providing support to them. So if we take a look at the US refugee and asylum seeking programs, the last 4 years of the Trump administration were as all of you know, a huge change from where Obama was increasing the number of refugees coming in, and the Trump administration immediately lowered those. So the US saw our historic lows for the refugee admissions program, lowest numbers ever admitted, ever accepted for being admitted since the start of the program in 1980 by the Reagan administration. So the highest refugee numbers were actually under Reagan because he was resettling Vietnamese post-war. And then the lowest numbers came with the Trump administration. So the Obama administration set the refugee numbers to be at 125,000 at the end of his term, and then Trump took office and has lowered that number increasingly until last October, when he set the fiscal year's number at 15,000 people. Last year, just over 11,000 people came in, even though that number was set to 18,000. Of course, part of that's because of COVID and a stop in flights and arrivals. But other individuals like asylum seekers and those special immigrant visa holders were still able to come into the country. I will note that the Biden administration is set to have the lowest amount of refugee arrivals of any president, even President Trump, because he has not yet signed the presidential determination for refugees. We have not seen refugees been able to come into the US yet. And so with that halting, we are set to resettle record low by the end of the fiscal year in September. Otherwise, the Trump administration gave governors and local officials the ability to veto resettlement in their communities, which is something that has always been set at the federal level and not the state and local. He attempted to terminate the DACA program, kept migrants held in Mexico while waiting for their asylum claims. This was called the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. He set to change the definition of public charge regulations, making it harder for those who are looking to gain permanent residency if they had to rely on the US government's welfare programs. He diverted military funds to construct the border fence at the southern border. He imposed what we call the Muslim travel ban because it was very specifically Muslim majority countries that were banned from anyone coming into the US. So that includes someone trying to travel for vacation, as well as someone who is a refugee and has a claim for resettlement. And he also perpetuated the separation of migrant children from their families at the southern border. And of course, things got really messy, and you had all those like 500 youth that were basically lost within the system, unable to connect to their family members. So what have we seen since the Biden administration has come in January? So immediately you saw a lot of executive orders come out of the administration's office. And these have been positive towards resettlement and towards migrant and asylum systems. We, in no means as a nonprofit, encourage one politician over another or one administration over another. I'd like to reiterate that as a nonprofit, we advocate for our clients, and we advocate for policies that affect our clients. So some of the things this administration has done was revoke allowing state and local governments to veto resettlement. There is already a consultation process that those individuals can be part of, as well as community members. And so it was kind of ignored that the community is asked for their input. He immediately revoked the Muslim travel bans. This includes Syrians. #1 country for producing refugees right now is Syria, and those individuals were banned from coming into our country. He has promised to raise the admissions for refugees to 62,500 for this fiscal year, and then the next fiscal year to 125,000. This will be record high for the US, and all of us refugee agencies are really scrambling to build up our capacity to serve while not having the clients yet. And the funding for that capacity is connected to clients arriving. So it's really shaking up our systems. But I again note that this has not been done yet. A lot of refugee agencies are calling upon members of Congress to urge the president that he must sign this presidential determination for refugees so they can begin traveling into the US again. He has made a promise, and he has not fulfilled it yet. And we have been told that this determination is sitting in the White House. He has consulted with Congress. It is ready to be signed. We are watching the release of the White House's briefing website every single second and refreshing our pages to see if they have released a new presidential determination so refugees can once again travel into the US. He has released policies that will protect dreamers and their families and provide pathways to citizenship. They're, of course, working to reverse the separation of children and families at the borders and more humane housing of children and adults who are families or individuals at the border, though that remains an ongoing kind of crisis situation with an increase in numbers at the border. So far, construction of the border wall has been halted. DHS is reviewing how we can best reform our asylum system. I will say that Title 42 is something you might hear. That is a public health crisis title that allows for non-essential migrants to be turned back. That was started by President Trump in reaction to COVID-19 and people still coming at our southern border. The Biden administration has kept this in place. So this is turning families and individuals away at the border due to public health crisis. And there's various opinions on whether or not that is a humane policy to have kept. And then additionally, the Biden administration has reversed the public charge rule itself, which would limit who could eventually become permanent residents for tapping into welfare systems, even though they are likely taxpayers themselves. Okay, so what we decided to be a policy, like a hard policy piece that is in Congress right now is the United States Citizenship Act. And you can access the actual wording of any bills for the House and the Senate. Additionally, you can monitor like where in the process are those bills? Have they been brought up to the floor? Are they in committee? Have they passed committee? Has it gone up to the Senate? This bill in particular provides an 8-year pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented people, specifically people who can pass background checks and are paying taxes. There's a 3-year period for a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and TPS holders, so temporary protected status holders, and certain farm workers as well. This replaces the term alien with non-citizen, which is something the Trump administration went through and had alien added instead of a non-citizen or undocumented individual. We believe this, of course, is a much more humanizing term. It supports asylum seekers in their files for claims, eliminating the fact that they would have to do that within 1 year. So if you have someone in the US living undocumented for several years, they're afraid to file an actual asylum claim because they might be denied because it wasn't immediately filed. It reforms the family-based immigration system to keep families together, and it also codifies funding for the Northern Triangle in Latin America, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, which really hits to those root causes of these migrant crises of immigrants coming up through Central America to the US. So the co-sponsors of this bill are all Democrats. That is definitely something to note when you are when you're advocating to a senator or congressperson, regardless of their party. It's important to know what bills have more leaning Democrat approval or more leaning Republican approval. It's also important to understand which bills is there more hope of being agreement. Obviously, we have some bills we would love to see passed, but might not be something that can actually get passed based on bipartisanship actually working in this process through Congress. So you can see who has sponsored the House bill and the bill in the Senate. And so if you were speaking to those individuals, you obviously would want to thank them for being a co-sponsor on this bill. If someone is not a co-sponsor, especially if they're in the party that seems to favor this bill, you would want to definitely ask them to sign on. So if you're looking at a specific policy like the US Citizenship Act, what are your main ask going to be, and how do you ask people to co-sponsor this legislation? So of course, your main ask is going to be something that a member of Congress can actually deliver. Co-sponsor this bill in the House or the Senate. And if they've done so, thank them. If they are likely not to, there's ways to talk to them about bipartisanship and aspects of the bill that you believe that they, as a person with their core beliefs, would want to sign on to, and areas where perhaps there can be some negotiation. Why they should co-sponsor this: it restores humanity and American value to our American immigration system. It is legal to ask for asylum. It is legal to come to a border. And so to remind these members of Congress that this is the Americans' values. These are your values, and you're being represented by that individual. This bill in particular allows those who are here illegally the opportunity to earn citizenship. So you'll see a lot of times a disinterest in bills that just automatically provide citizenship as what would be seen almost as a handout. And so displaying that this isn't something that is allowing everyone to become a US citizen. We're not on the Oprah show. We're not going, you're a citizen, you're a citizen, you're a citizen. We are allowing the opportunity to earn that citizenship. Additionally, this bill does require background checks and the payment of taxes. And so this is another way to ensure that these criminals are not being given status. That's heavily a concern of one party over another. And so really knowing what those party hard lines are with immigration and being able to say there's no excuse. Background checks are here. Payment of taxes are here. Humanizing language is here. And we still have our American legacy of welcoming. Furthermore, this bill modernizes our immigration system. It keeps families together. It manages the border through technology, and it also addresses the root causes of this migration. And it ensures that people are continually allowed to come to US and seek refuge and flee persecution. So I know this was a lot, but this is just one bill that is in Congress right now and can really have an impact on the immigration system. But there are so many other things you would be able to speak to a member of Congress about concerning migrants and refugees. And like Shana said, that all depends on that member's party affiliation. It depends on their core values. It depends on what your state's core values are, and who's making money for your state, and is that immigrants themselves. So knowing all of that, knowing what committees this congressperson sits on is all very, very helpful when proposing co-sponsorship of something like the US Citizenship Act. And
Thanks so much, Dana. Olivia just flagged in the chat, all of that information that Dana just shared is available in a Google Doc that you can go ahead and open up right now. We're also going to circulate a recording of today's training, as well as this slide deck to everyone who registered. So you can just use these hyperlinks here to pull up the text for both the House and the Senate bill for the US Citizenship Act specifically. We're going to move briefly into an open discussion on best practices before we then move into the actual workshop portion of today's session. So as a reminder, keep that Google document on hand because you'll want to reference that in your preparation for our simulated meetings. But let's talk advocacy tips. I'm going to put a pause on this slideshow in a moment so that we can all see one another, but I want to get the ball rolling. I think two of the key tips that I like to keep in mind before going into any meeting are to have a game plan. If I've researched the representative that I'm talking to, committee affiliation, like Dana was emphasizing, some of those party hard lines so that I'm confident in my approach and how I'm framing the issue, that then allows me to be very flexible, to anticipate resistance, to start thinking about what questions might come up so that I can feel confident that I can answer those questions. Or if it's super specific and I don't know the answer, I at least know where I can direct them towards. Something that I also keep in mind is this idea of stepping up or stepping back. These are conversations. If I'm dominating the conversation, if I find that I'm contributing a lot, I'm going to remind myself to take a step back and let somebody else answer a question and let somebody else contribute, and vice versa. If I find that I'm not really speaking up and I'm kind of just hanging back, to go ahead and to share my voice because I'm a constituent or I'm a valued member of the organization that I'm representing and have a right to be there, and I should share my opinion. I want to open this up to the group. We're so fortunate that we have a number of experienced advocates with us today. So maybe Dana, I can throw it over to you to get us started. What are some of your best practices, advocacy tips and tricks that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, like I said, ask what the knowledge level in the room is. Another is, again, that knowledge of your leader and their core beliefs, and even if that person is of a different party, to be able to really find commonality. No matter who you're sitting in the room with, how much you would rather vote for anyone but this person, they are representing you. And so finding ways that you can connect as people and as humans, even if it's like just a comment about liking something in their office that's an award or something that reminds you of home that they have sitting around their office. That can be just a small way to make things very friendly. These members, teammates are usually going to be extremely friendly. Another is be conscious of their party, but don't let that make you think that they're not going to support something you want them to support because of party hard lines. Understanding, like when I lived in Kentucky and I did refugee advocacy in Kentucky. So with McConnell's team, taking a pretty hard line on refugee resettlement, we knew that the stories of our clients we were resettling were only going to go so far. So we appealed to him and his staffers on the basis of the economy and who in our client polls and the Cubans coming into Kentucky are doing the hard work that's helping the Amazon fulfillment centers run, helping these horse farms run, and building everything around the Kentucky Derby. A lot of undocumented labor going on at the Kentucky Derby, which is earning millions of dollars for the state. So being able to appeal the best way you think that member will be influenced by. And yeah, I think that also people think that when they go to advocate, it has to be a hard ask for something, or that you, if this person has already co-signed this bill, that you have nothing else to ask. So it's important to note that you should ask for, like, or not ask, but give thanks. Be like, I am so thankful you did this. I am so thankful you did this. And then think of ways that they could additionally make you as a constituent thankful. Because I mean, we've got some great senators and members of Congress surrounding us here in the DMV. And we continue to thank those members to make sure we build those good relationships and that we can call on them in times of need because we have built that good relationship with them.
I think that's
John, do you have anything you want to add to that? So John, who's volunteering with LSS, he served several years as a lobbyist to Congress, and he is doing advocacy with LSS right now, so he might have a couple. If he's able to unmute, no problem. If you're not, you can share those in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Dana. Just a couple things. My area of expertise is affordable housing and neighborhood revitalization. And we always used to coach our peers that you got to put a human face on the particular issue, that rather than citing statistic after statistic, you've got to personalize it and dramatize the impact of the issue on the constituents that the representative or senator represents. I think that's the important thing. It's also good, as has been mentioned, to share the presentation. Don't let an individual basically take all the time, but rather, before the meeting begins, have an understanding among the group as to who's going to say what. One is going to introduce, another is going to lay out the issue, another is going to do the ask, and others will be available for answering specific questions. Don't be put off if you don't actually see the representative or the senator in your meeting. Staff are very key players on the Hill, and just be reassured that anything that you're reporting to that staffer will end up in the memo to the representative or senator that you met with them and this is what you ask, and don't be afraid to ask to let us know whether the member is actually following through on what you asked him or her to do. So those would be my thoughts.
Thanks so much, John and Dana. I think they're great examples. Dana, to your point as well, it just made me think of the fact that in our jurisdiction, Rep. Andy Harris represents Maryland's 1st Congressional District. And he's considered a very conservative member of the Republican Party. So when we're there to talk about something related to climate change or the Paris Climate Agreement, or even refugee rights, you might think it would go a different way, but when in fact, Rep. Harris cares very deeply about keeping the Chesapeake Bay clean. And so we might use different language when talking about sustainability and environmental rights, but there is a shared goal. Same with migration. H-1B visas are tremendous contributors to Maryland One's economy because of the summer season and having a lot of migrant laborers come in. So it's also a policy priority for him, and he's worked on a lot of different bipartisan related issue areas. So,
and on that too, Shana, those SIV holders, I mean, there are groups around the US of veterans that call those individuals veterans, and Congress sets those number of SIVs. So definitely an opportunity to bring in, these are people who have given service. And with refugee resettlement itself, these individuals are the most vetted immigrants coming into the US. So you're hitting on those security issues and military veterans as a way to appeal one topic maybe more to one party versus another. There's definitely asks that you can have that are relevant to both parties, and both hardliners in their parties as well.
A great point. I'd love to hear from our group, maybe one of our newer advocates. Maybe you advocated for the first time at the congressional level this year. What were some of the tips, either for preparation or the meeting itself, that you found helpful? You can go ahead and unmute and just share.
For me, when we were advocating for the SDGs at congressional offices, one of the most important things about the meeting, I think, was the level of organization, like the order in which people spoke, so that there was not much dead time. We only had about 20 to 30 minutes, and it was a large group of us. I think it was around 8 to 9 people. And we managed to get everyone to speak and say their own personal stories or their own stakes in the issue. And that organization was really key.
I think for me is actively listening to the person or the staff member who spoke before me, because then this gives you the opportunity to tie in their story into yours, and then it flows like a smooth transition. And going back to what Shayna talked about, making it into a conversation with everyone at the table, it's supposed to sound like a flowing, a continuous conversation from one staff to another, as opposed to just separated, kind of like, hey, I'm sharing my story and my perspective, and then the next person is going to share their story and their perspective. I also had a question in regards to identifying with Republican representatives. For me, my faith, my Christian faith actually inspires me to see the humanity in others, and it inspires me to assist others in economic need. And so with that being said, but also bearing in mind that religion is a touchy subject, just like politics, is it okay to identify and to personalize myself with them at that level?
Absolutely. It's no coincidence that most of the 9 refugee agencies nationally are affiliated with a church or congregation. You have HIAS, which is the Jewish Foundation. You have the Lutheran Foundation, the Catholics, Church World Service, World Relief, Episcopals. I mean, these groups are definitely as an advocacy tool using religion. And they're saying, hey, this is actually a Christian value. This is a Muslim value. This is a Jewish value. And you, as a person of faith, should be following these values. And that is absolutely, absolutely a good point. And we just know how tied even the Republican Party has come with more evangelical Christian ideology at like a higher level. And so to be able to pull that in as an important issue to that member and as an important issue to you is definitely a very, very good way to connect. As Christians, we should welcome people. As parents, we should welcome these children, these migrants. I mean, finding those connections where you're saying, me and you are the same person, even though we don't always agree.
I'd like to kind of echo what some of you all have said already. But one thing that's been that I've noticed about my changing strategy is that at first I was very nervous coming into these meetings, and I just kind of had just spewed out what I had to say, and I was like shaking. I was really nervous. I didn't know. I just felt like I just spewed out whatever I was thinking. And then as I became more familiar with the process and as I gained my footing a little bit more, I did realize the importance of the conversation. So instead of just launching into what I had to say, I would ask the person, typically someone from like a legislative assistant or something like that. I would ask them, hey, do you live in the area? Especially if it's Virginia, like senator or legislative assistant, there's a good chance that they'd probably live in Arlington or Alexandria, DC. So I'd ask like, hey, do you live around here? And then if they, depending on their answer, I then connected back to my story and say, do you remember that? Or do you know what I'm talking about when I'm, mentioning a certain street, or depending on what the subject was. And so they would then engage with me and say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. So then it establishes a conversation and a way to just make it so that you're not giving a monologue, but that you're in creating a discussion, and it actually puts you at ease, weirdly. It's kind of a weird thing that happens where you kind of end up lowering your guard a little bit and just becoming more familial and just pleasant. And that's another point that I would like to say is I always tend to go high. I say thank you, even if I read some of the bills that they've passed and I'm like, oh, I can never get behind this. I always go high. And like Dana was saying, I do try to find some commonality. There was one Virginia representative who represented a rural part of the state. And even though I did not agree with the bills that he had proposed, I thanked him for representing a rural population, because oftentimes, like I had experienced living in a rural population, I feel very disconnected from what's going on in DC. And I didn't feel like I had a voice. So I, just said thank you for representing the people who often don't feel like they have a voice in the national sphere, and moving on from there. But I always go high, and I always try to just be a friend.
That's lots of great tips and advice being shared. We have time for one more. Joseph, please.
I would like to add a few points regarding to best practice, which I experienced for the last more than almost 7 years since I've been a member of policy advocacy group to this UN Association for USA. The most important practice is clearly define our policy objective or advocacy objective. What we need to intend to get from this advocacy is a very crucial point. So before we start advocacy, we practice the objective of that issue. And also, of course, we try to identify and reframing our advocacy issue as well. I remember Sheena helps us to define our advocacy issues. Then we are reframing the advocacy ideas or issues or the policy. So the other is a very important things for me is really we need to make research on policies and point of advocacy, because research making a policy and advocacy issue helps us clearly to lay out our roadmap, where to go and what we need to achieve in a short term, and also what we need to achieve in the long term. So this really helps me while I was advocates with the team, and also personally I use this practice while I'm doing any policy presentation or advocacy issues. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joseph. And I mean, it really is important that research, at least for me, is always what makes me feel confident, because at the very least, even if I'm maybe intimidated by the person I'm speaking with, I know what I'm talking about, and I can at least fall back on those talking points. Let's move into putting these ideas into practice. For our breakout activity today, you have scheduled a meeting with DC Senators Shayna Baser and Dana Lee, because DC is now a state in this hypothetical scenario. We are both on the fence about co-sponsoring the 2021 US Citizenship Act. So you're going to have 5 minutes, just 5 minutes in your breakout room to quickly review the talking points that we've already discussed and put together a plan with your delegation. We'll then come back together. Each group will have about 5 minutes to present. And if we have time, Dana and I might also ask a question. And after each group goes, we'll give our feedback and we'll also hear feedback from the group. What was really excellent? What was a fantastic model? And maybe what are some ways to continue to develop, in the future, so that when you're meeting a real representative or their staff, just some things to keep in mind. Keep these things in mind while working with your group. Introduce UNA-NCA and why you're having this conversation. How can you connect this topic to a personal story and create those opportunities for emotional resonance or identified shared goals? Do you deliver a very clear core ask? Do we understand what specifically you're asking for? And how do you answer questions if we have time? So we're going to go ahead right now, send you to your breakout rooms, and we will see you shortly. Thanks, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope it was a productive emergency session with your delegations. We are going to go ahead and get started. Our first group includes Cassidy, Selena, Emma, Jackie, and Joseph. The floor is yours.
All right, well, hello, Senator Vaser. Thank you so much for meeting with us today and for taking the time to speak with us. We are representatives of the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, or UNA-NCA. So we are one of the oldest and largest divisions of the larger UNA-USA, and we pride ourselves in working to promote public awareness and really of the UN and strengthen relationships with the UN-US and really just promote UN goals, including the all-important human rights, which is an issue that we are going to talk to you about today. So thank you so much. I will pass it over to Selena now.
Good afternoon, Senators Leon and Senator Vaser. It's a pleasure to have you all with us today. Congratulations on being the inaugural senators for DC. But I'm here to talk to you today about the American Citizenship Act of 2021 and make a personal connection to the bill. I live just right over the border from DC. I'm right in Arlington. I'm a teacher there. And this bill is specifically important for me because as a teacher for Fairfax County, we've received several students who have come here as either unaccompanied minors or have parents who are undocumented, and I am concerned for them, and especially because our ESL classes are quite full. And so what this bill does is establish more English language acquisition opportunities for these students. And we would just really love if you could support this. And I just want to bring your attention to this. I know that Senator Vaser, I know that your platform is education. So I feel like this relates specifically to your background. I just wanted to bring your attention to that specifically. My colleagues in DC have similar issues with full ESL classes. So again, just want to bring your attention, but thank you so much for having us here and congratulations again on your positions. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Visers and Senator Dina. My name is Joseph Andarje. I am a member of UNCA in the state of Virginia, District 8 Congressional. So I am very grateful for your time and being with us. Having said, today I am here to advocate with my colleagues regarding to the Citizenship 2020 Act to be sponsored by your honorable office. As you might know, refugee and migrants are a very relevant. Hello, do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. Yeah. Today, we are going to bring to your attention about Citizenship 2021 to be sponsored by your honorable office. When you say about Citizenship 2021 Act, we are really included or embedded all rights of refugees and migrants, regardless to their country of origin. They have to be getting all they deserve. In the act, we try to put the international laws to be respected, and also they have a part and parcel of our community when their status is clearly defined. Up to that, we believe that migrants and refugees are a backbone of the country in many circumstances. For instance, they really contribute to the economy through their labors and skill transformation. We also believe that their social remittance is also very important. We never forget that. Like all immigrants and refugees, they have core values that reflect their country of origin. They may be very relevant where they are hosting countries receiving. So, we are also believe that refugees and migrants, when their rights are respected, they are easy to integrate with the country hosts. Your Honor, we really present their issues and concern to get a full attention and support from your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. I will make the final ask of our meeting today, which is that you co-sponsor the American Citizen Act of 2021, and I will briefly go over what entails the act. First, we would like to switch the language to humanize immigrants a little bit. So we would switch the language from alien to non-citizen, because these people are not of other worlds. They bleed red just like you and I. Also, the act would provide a legal way for citizens towards citizenship. So immigrants would need to be here for 8 years, and they would need to be paying taxes and have background checks. So they would really earn the right to be here and provide value to the US economy. Additionally, the bill would also prevent the separation of children at the southern border, which is crucial just because of the nature of it. It's inhumane to separate children at the border. It has had negative consequences. It looks bad for the US. Children have been lost in the system, which is just tragic. And so it would provide more humanity and look better for everyone if we would keep families together. And then lastly, the bill would also provide a citizenship for a 3-year track for dreamers to get citizenship. And these are people who the US is the only home that they know, and it's really humane that we give these people a right to their home. It's all they've ever known, as opposed to deporting them to a country that they've never been to and are unfamiliar with. So thank you for your time today, Senator Baser and Senator Leah. Thank you for meeting with us today.
Thank you so much to this group. It's always so impressive how cohesive your argument, your presentation was, given how short of a turnaround time you actually had to collaborate and how recently you just received this information from LSS. So kudos to you. I want to open up the floor for some collective feedback, some things that they did really great. One thing that I want to highlight, I thought, Selena, your connection to your role as an educator was very impactful. So well done on that. Emma, I like how you sort of framed the conversation. as a way to bridge that gap between like, well, why is a UNA talking about this, kind of situating how it falls under the purview of the organization. One thing I would consider in the future, and obviously we understand the context of this exercise, is Cassidy, I thought you did a great job of running through some of those key highlights. I would like to hear those a little bit earlier. So maybe weaving that into the rest of the presentation, hearing a little bit about not just why it's important to preserve refugee rights, but then connecting it to the bill, as opposed to kind of the two-part of like, it's important to do this, and here's what the bill does. Thoughts, kudos from the rest of the group. What did you like about group one's presentation? What worked well?
Yeah, I loved that. I thought it, again, was so well done for like a 5-minute turnaround. So see how easy you can be prepared for these meetings. I thought it was excellent, like hit all of the points, and really like Joseph brought it back to like that integration side, that this is not just like this high level bill. These are individuals' lives, and these are people who are being integrated into our communities, their children in the school systems, and like love the thank yous that were slipped in, the flattery that Selena gave. That always, these people in politics, they love flattery, so give them what they want, flatter them. Yeah, that was just really excellent. I think you all did a great job, and I don't have any critiques of that. I think that's how a lot of my sessions going into actual meetings with senators and Congress people have gone. And of course you have that game plan of as this is how it's going to go, and that might change. So being able to be reactive and kind of seat of your pants, is that the phrase, sometimes is also going to be helpful to add in there. And yeah, personalization of both the bill and what the bill does to those who are in this constituency, and personalization of the member or their staff members as well.
Any other thoughts from the group before we move to our next presentation? All right, folks, let's hear from Kishia, Christine, Marissa, and Nijad.
Hello, Representative Dana. Thank you so much for coming, firstly, and we are just so grateful for your time. We don't want this to be a session where we just talk at you, but please feel free to interrupt us if you have questions. And so starting off, we'd like to talk about what the United Nations Association does. And so we are essentially kind of the bridge between the UN and US citizens. We're here to promote understanding of UN policies and SDGs, but we are simultaneously a 501c3 organization. We are trying to assess policies independently and raise awareness. And so in doing so, the Citizenship Act of 2021 is one thing that we're trying to do, raise awareness within the community, and also urge you to look at the bill and assess it, and basically carry it forward in passing it. And with that, I'll pass it to Marissa.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, senators, for taking the time to meet with us. I have a bit of a personal anecdote. I am going to be pursuing law school, specifically in immigration and privacy rights. I currently work at a nonprofit that focuses on immigration, and we currently have a lawsuit going on with 4 amazing, courageous women who fled their countries and are currently living in sanctuary in 4 different churches across the United States. They all have children. They've all been living in sanctuary in these churches, which basically means they cannot leave the church because they fear if they leave the church, they will be deported for stepping outside of the church. So these communities have banded together to provide them everything they could possibly need to ensure that they care for their children. So this bill specifically would allow these women to be able to leave the church, be on a pathway to citizenship, be able to flee the abuse that they fled from their countries.
and provide a better life for their children. One plaintiff, her name is Vicky, her daughter just talks about going to Disneyland, but Vicky can't really do that right now because they are terrified to leave the church. So Vicky just wants to be able to leave the church and have a better life for both of her children. So with that, I will pass it off to Kishia.
Thank you so much for what you have already contributed. So I'm actually an educator, and my student population largely consists of immigrant students, and most of them are actually undocumented. And it's disheartening for me to hear that when people say that they're here to take opportunities away from others, because they are really not. And being in the classroom, I know that. I see these students come to school every day, and they fight and they work so hard. And they're not here to take opportunities away from everyone. I mean, come on, we are in America, and you know, most people say America is the land of opportunities. And most of these students are here because they are not, they're actually trying to escape the horrors of their own country, because they live in countries where there is a high prevalence of poverty, violence, lack of education. I mean, when you think about a country like Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador, and some of those other Central American or even South American countries where a lot of those students come from, those places are rigged with violence, and a lot of their parents want better for their children. And that's one of the reasons why, to some respect, we have so many kids here who are unaccompanied minor, because their parents want more for them, and they see America as a land of opportunity. You know, they also don't have good health care or even sanitation in their country. And so that's why they're here. All countries are not created equal. So when we sit here and we're thinking about these children and what their needs are not just the children, but immigrants in particular, in general, and what their needs are. We know that all countries are not created equal, because a lot of these immigrants come from countries that are very underdeveloped, and they are seeking opportunities like employment, housing, and just pretty much a better way of life. And as America is the superpower in the global sphere, we know that the US can definitely afford to grant immigrants a better way of life by providing them with a pathway to citizenship, and even to extend some time to asylum seekers. And you can actually help by sponsoring the American Citizenship Act of 2021. I have students who are undocumented and who, by no fault of their own, are living here. And the fact that they call this their home and want to contribute to the economy and want to build their communities, they should have the opportunity to do so. I teach at a school, and I teach students that I've never seen so much perseverance and so much hard work and so much ambition. And they work so hard. It's baffling to think that these students work so hard for 8 years and cannot access higher education or healthcare or achieve the the quote unquote American dream, which they come here to achieve, because they are denied pathway to citizenship, or they are denied any kind of ability to participate in the democratic process in the US. So please sponsor this bill and make sure that these children and these adults who come to America to seek a better way of life are able to do so. Because when America preaches, or they are championing, they always champion equality, and they always champion human rights. So do the right thing and sponsor this bill. Thank you. And I want to go ahead and pass it on to Joseph.
I think Joseph was in the other group. Is this group 2? Are you all done?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the third group for the sake of time, but I'm going to use my facilitator privilege and just say, wonderful job. I thought the personalization of the stories was really impactful and really effective. And it also reminded me of those talking points that LSS outlined, this idea of framing the argument for some of, earning citizenship. And so this idea of tying it to the reality of how hard people are working and, they're not just waiting around for a handout for 8 years. It was a very powerful way to illustrate that by drawing on real life experience. Dana, if you're good, I'd love to move to our last group of 3 so that we can hear from them before we close today's session. All right, so last but not least is John, Olivia, and Ryan. Take it away.
So thank you, Senators, for meeting here with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our organization. I am joined here with my colleagues from the United Nations of the National Capital Area. Here at UNA NCA, we aim to educate the public on the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which extends to all people, including migrants and refugees. Senators, I know that you've had previous meetings with us about the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're here just to talk a little bit about migrants and refugees. Our advocacy agenda includes them, which is why we're here to talk about the American Citizenship Act of 2021 specifically and what our ask is today. So I'll now be passing it along to my colleague Ryan, who will talk a little bit more about the resolution and what our ask is here today.
Thank you very much, Olivia. First of all, before I go into our core ask, I do want to congratulate both Senator Lee and Senator Vaser on your inaugural positions of Senators of DC. I know that both of you, along with Governor Eleanor Holmes Norton, will form a new pathway forward for DC. And a new path forward is actually why we are here today. So our core ask for you is to co-sponsor the 2021 U.S. Citizenship Act. Within this act, we'll forge a new path forward, just like you are with DC, for the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in this country, some of whom are living in the DMV themselves. This will also humanize them, replacing some language as previously known as aliens with non-citizen. It's important that you guys support and co-sponsor this bill to get those undocumented citizens a path forward to citizenship. And I'll now turn it over to John, who will go into a little bit more on the Citizenship Act and immigrant issues.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Senators, for seeing us today. We know your time is limited and valuable. We will not waste it. U.S. Citizenship Act, while at the moment co-sponsored only by Democrats, is a worthy look on the part of Republicans. Why would I say that? Well, frankly, it's the right thing to do. It is a manifestation and an expression of our American values of welcoming the stranger and allowing that stranger the opportunity to avail himself or herself of the virtues of American citizenship. But you might say that, well, that's amnesty. We're rewarding people for something they didn't earn. And I would say quite the contrary. They will earn the right to citizenship by having to wait 8 years, by having to pass a rigorous background check, and to have paid their taxes. So again, it's the right thing to do. President Reagan in 1986, when he signed similar legislation, confronted amnesty head on by saying it is the right thing for we Republicans to do. And it's important that not only do you co-sponsor this bill, but you take a leadership role, urging hearings, urging markup, and urging floor action. So again, we thank you for your time. Do you have any questions? Well, if not, good day.
Thank you so much. Great job, team. I'll just start as we transition into our wrap up. Thought you did a really great job, as did the other groups, of making those connections to our completely imaginary policy positions, which was very effective. Selena connecting it to education, the way that Ryan made the connection to forging this pathway forward. I thought it was really well executed. Dana, thoughts from you?
I was just typing some thoughts. Yeah, I just thought like being advocates of your clients or your students is excellent. Really trying to get people in the room who are directly impacted. People who can give stories like those students, like those clients, is always going to be helpful, but not always possible. So being able to advocate the stories and the message that those individuals have set themselves is always helpful. And I liked the approach that John took. He took that kind of speaking to a Republican leader approach, and I think regardless of what party you are or what party they are going in, being able to kind of plot out ways to speak to them as like, I liked how John was just like, frankly, like talking to them like they're just any other person, but also being really appreciative of their time. And I thought group 2 also did a great job of being like, the power to do this is in your hands. Like we're looking to you to do this. And so great approaches by everyone. So thank you. You're all great advocates. It's awesome.
Really, really well done. Thank you for spending your time with us for this workshop. We will be circulating this recording and resources, and there is an opportunity to then put these skills to the test. Actually, Refugee Council USA is hosting congressional meetings, I believe, next week. And I think, Dana, you dropped some information in the chat about how to register, and that's on our website. But overall, really well done. I hope these lessons have been helpful. It's always a really valuable exercise, whether or not you've advocated before. But I'll echo Dana. Great work, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you so much to LSS for providing us such an informative briefing and the opportunity to partner with you and your team on this. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Always, thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much.